Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin, and here we go. Right now is a key moment in the nearly 2-year-long special counsel investigation. This is the moment that the man who was at one point in charge of Donald Trump's presidential campaign, the moment that he is facing his final sentence. Paul Manafort is before a judge in Washington, D.C. right now, and he is facing a possible sentence of 10 years in prison for conspiracy against the United States and also witness tampering. This is the second criminal case that Manafort is being sentenced for in a matter of days, quite frankly. Last week, another judge sentenced him to 47 months, just shy of 4 years in prison for bank and tax fraud. So this is the first person that Robert Mueller and his team indicted in the special counsel's Russia investigation. This is also the man that Judge Amy Berman Jackson sent to prison already, revoking his bail after allegations of witness tampering surfaced. It has been a winding road to this moment, but at this moment we are at. What is Judge Jackson considering at this very moment? Will Paul Manafort's apology in court just now, will it have an impact on his sentence? And what does this mean for the President of the United States? CNN's Pamela Brown, CNN's Shimon Prokupez, they are outside the U.S. District Court in Washington, have been following this from the very beginning. Shimon, guys, Pamela, you're getting updates from inside the court. What is sticking out to you right now, especially hearing from Manafort just a short time ago?
Well, sorry, we just heard from Manafort. Now they're in recess, and we'll learn the sentencing after. But Manafort was a very different person today, it seemed, than what we saw last week. Yes, he showed up in a wheelchair. He was wearing a suit, unlike last week. But he was more contrite, and he directly apologized. He said flat out, "I am sorry for what I've done." He tried to make the case that that's what he tried to convey last week, but it wasn't evident what was in his heart because, as you'll recall, he was criticized by the judge and others for not fully accepting responsibility and not apologizing. So he made sure he didn't make the same mistake today, giving this full-throated apology. He also went on to say that he knows it's his conduct that has brought him here today. He talked about being in solitary confinement for 9 months and how he is a changed person. He made clear to the judge that he is a different person today than he was a year ago. And he says, "Look, I am not going to continue on with the same behavior that has landed me here today." He brought up his age. He says, "I'm going to be 70 next month." He said his wife is 66, and he says he wants to be together with her. He says, look, he is a primary caregiver, and he doesn't want to be apart from her. So he really pleaded to the judge to take that into account, and hoping that the judge had some sympathy towards him and believed that he was heartfelt in his apology. But this is his last shot here. Let's not undermine just how important this is, how high the stakes are. It is Manafort's last shot. He faces up to 10 years in prison in addition to the 4 years he's already been sentenced to from last week, Shimon.
He's using his wife in this case. Please let me and my wife be together. Obviously, being in jail, waiting for this sentencing. He's been in jail now for 9 months in solitary confinement. You can see that it's taken an effect on him, and he's pleading to the judge for some compassion. It worked in the other case. It's going to be interesting to see how Judge Amy Berman Jackson here accept that, whether or not this becomes enough for her now to say, you know what, I believe you. I do think you have taken responsibility and you have shown that you're a changed man. But there are so many factors that are stacked against him here because he lied after he pleaded guilty and began to cooperate with the special counsel's office. The judge now, just to update everyone, is in a recess. She's going to come back at some point. We expect to hear a lot from her, and then we will hear at any moment, once she starts speaking, what she plans to do in terms of a sentence for him. Remember, he's facing up to 10 years here. I think the significance of today, you could see it, you can hear it in Paul Manafort's voice. I think he's realizing that this here dictates whether or not he will spend the rest of his life behind bars, in prison, unable to be with his wife, with his family, and live the life that he's used to. I think that's what we saw today in Paul Manafort. He made it very clear that last week when he was before Judge Ellis in Virginia, it just didn't become clear to anyone that he was apologizing, that he was remorseful. And he wanted to make that very clear here today, that he was sorry. That is a big step here, which may help him in the end.
Yeah, we'll have to see if the judge, Amy Jackson, believed that he was heartfelt and sincere in that apology. And she did say that while he has lived up to the burden, bared the burden, that he did accept responsibility, that is not a reflection on his character. She also said that the fact that he lied, witness tampered after pleading guilty has some relevance. And so she's going to have to weigh this apology from him, whether she believes that is sincere, and the fact that he did lie, that he did witness tamper after committing these crimes and pleading guilty to them. So we'll have to wait and see what she ultimately decides here today.
Yeah, and not only the sentence that she'll be handing down is obviously important, but why, what's behind it, and what is in her thinking is all going to be dissected for a long time to come. Guys, they're standing by. Pamela, Shimon, they're there. We're going to bring it right back to you guys as things develop over there. But joining me right now to discuss this, because a lot has happened in the last few minutes. CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash is here. CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Shan Wu is here as well. He represented Manafort's deputy for a time. Rick Gates has also even been before. Judge Amy Berman Jackson will be asking you about that in a second, Shan. And Ellie Honig, CNN legal analyst and former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Ellie, let me just get your take on what you heard from Paul Manafort, a different, more contrite Paul Manafort, as Pam and Shimon are laying out. What is your take? What's your read and reaction to how Manafort spoke in court this morning?
Yeah, so, Kate, it's a starkly different tone from what Manafort put out there last week, and I think there's a reason for that. I think we have different tone because there's a different audience, right? Judge Ellis, who I think went very soft, unjustifiably soft on Manafort last week, had been sort of skeptical towards the special counsel, towards Mueller's team from the start. On the flip side, now it's a different ballgame. Now we've got Judge Amy Berman Jackson in Washington, D.C., who has shown very little tolerance for Manafort's shenanigans. She is the judge who remanded Paul Manafort, who took away his bail and threw him into jail when he tried to tamper with witnesses. She is the judge who specifically held a hearing and found that he had intentionally, not inadvertently, but intentionally lied to the prosecutor. So I think he's got a very different audience here, and I think he's trying to focus his message to that audience.
Shan, does a convincing apology, a heartfelt apology in court, do you think it has an impact on any judge in the moments before sentencing, but specifically speaking about this judge who you have been before, Judge Amy Berman Jackson?
I think it can. I think it's one of the few things in court that can really make a difference because so much of the arguments and analysis is laid out ahead of time in the papers. To add on to something that Ellie's pointing out here, you know, Manafort's in a different posture, right? He went to trial proclaiming innocence in Virginia, lost. He shows up in court in the prison garb. I'm a broken man, but I'm unbowed. I was innocent, but I'm convicted. I admit that. Here, he's saying, I accepted responsibility. I'm here in my suit today. I'm a man of dignity, taking responsibility for my actions. So he's trying a different tactic here. And I think apologizing is very important for the judges to hear. And I think that may help him a little bit with this judge.
Dana, your perspective on kind of all of this in the context of the role that this man played, though Donald Trump and everyone around him has tried to, for a long time, downplay the impact that Paul Manafort had on the campaign. He was the chairman of the campaign. We all know this. At a critical point, he was involved with the campaign.
Exactly.
The crimes that he is facing do not have to do with the campaign. But the impact of a man of Paul Manafort's stature in terms of the president's orbit, Donald Trump's orbit, sitting in front of a judge now saying that he apologizes, he's humiliated, and he has learned his lesson, essentially.
Yeah, I think your point is important, and that is that these discussions, the investigation, the pleading, everything with not just Manafort but other characters have been going on for so long. People might be numb to it. But this is an important point as the president's former campaign chair is facing his second sentencing in 2 weeks before a federal judge for multiple federal crimes, of taking a step back and remembering exactly what I just said, that this is the president's former campaign chairman. No, he wasn't there a very long time. But as you said, he was there and hired at a very critical time to make sure that the then candidate, presumptive nominee for the Republican Party, actually got the delegates. And he was crucial. He and his deputy, Rick Gates, who is also in a lot of trouble, cooperating as well, were really crucial at that time. And he was hired obviously without a lot of vetting. I mean, no, he wasn't, a convict at the time, but anybody who has been around knew that the rumors were some pretty shady dealings with some pretty shady characters in the Ukraine and Russia. So that is an important point to make, even though, as we heard last week from Manafort's lawyer, and it's hard to imagine we won't hear it again today, no matter what happens in that courtroom, a very loud and clear message to the President of the United States that there is no collusion, trying to clearly get a pardon.
Well, but very clearly, just so there's no confusion for everybody out there, collusion is not part of this case. Collusion is not, right. Russia collusion was not a question before this judge. That's the same that the judge said last week, that Russia collusion was not a question in the case then, and that was misconstrued. But to your point, I do think it is important, because with all of that context, Manafort's attorneys walked out of the courthouse last week and said this. I think what most importantly, what you saw today is the same thing that we've said from day one. There's absolutely no evidence that Paul Manafort was involved in any collusion with any government official from Russia. You could say,
those are buzzwords.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was right after the sentencing that had nothing to do with Russia collusion. The entire case had nothing to do with Russia collusion.
Those are buzzwords. That is the mantra that the president says publicly, that the president says privately, and has for 2 years. And those buzzwords were done, no question, very intentionally to send that message to the one man who has the ability to change Paul Manafort's fate at this point, and that is the President of the United States.
There's not much other reason to talk about something completely unrelated to your case unless it is trying to, right after sentencing, unless you're trying to send a message to someone else. Ellie, in court just now, Manafort did say that please don't keep them apart, he and his wife, basically asking to sentence him to no longer than the 47 months that he's already been sentenced to. Do you think that is a possibility?
Look, I think it's a possibility that the judge looks at factors like family and sympathy. That kind of thing matters at sentencing. Look, sentencing is a holistic exercise, and I know we're all sort of following this intensely and wondering what the number is going to be. But being in a courtroom for sentencing, and I've been in for a lot of them, is a really solemn event. You usually have a courtroom packed with family members, with friends, and it becomes very real. You do have a human being in front of you. Not to make excuses, but this is a very human exercise. Do I think the judge will give him no extra time? No, I think that's very, very unlikely. I think she's likely to go towards the top of that 10-year range. I do think she will run it concurrently, meaning at the same time as his 4 years, right? As opposed to, she has the option of consecutive, which means tacking it on top, but that's fairly rare, and I don't expect to see that.
Shan, do you think, and I know that the judge had said in court today that, I want to make sure I get her words right, that when it comes to the sentence that she is going to be imposing today, it cannot be a review or revision of what's happening in another court. I totally understand the judge saying that. But do you think that what happened last week has any kind of in terms of his sentence last week that surprised some, that it wasn't longer? Do you think it can have an impact on this week?
It can, but I think the only real impact it's going to have on this judge, the way she thinks, is this question that Elliot alluded to, which is the concurrent, what part of it will be concurrent. There's a lot of speculation about what she's going to do, a lot of wishful thinking, too. She is not going to be some sort of avenger who is making up for what happened in the other courtroom. That's not the kind of judge she is at all. She's going to focus on what's in front of her here, and she's going to punish him for what he pled guilty to here, as well as the other problems that he created for himself. So I agree. She is going to put some more time on it. It's not going to be 100% concurrent, but it's certainly, I would be really shocked if she were to go to the max and run it consecutive. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Look, and an important part of the context here when it comes to this judge is when she is done with this sentencing, she is not done with the Russia investigation. She has become the kind of overseeing judge at this district court in Washington for all things that the special counsel is bringing before her when it comes to Roger Stone and others. So it still continues in that regard. But today, we do know one thing. We will find out the fate for Paul Manafort, the president's former campaign chairman, and the crimes that he has committed. So everyone, please, if you will, stay with us. We're going to keep our eye on that courthouse. Paul Manafort, I was just told, has now come back into the courtroom, which means we are waiting now for the judge to come back in. And everyone together, we will find out very quickly what happens next. Stay with us.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Our eyes on the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. after about a year-and-a-half-long legal battle. The man at the top of the President Trump's campaign at one point, Paul Manafort, today will be learning his fate, not just today, any moment now. Paul Manafort is back in court after making his case and apologizing to the judge, to the court. This morning, he's back in court. He's sitting down. We're now waiting for the judge to come in to hand down that sentence. While we wait for that, let me go back to CNN Shimon Prokupecz and Pamela Brown. Obviously, we focus a lot on what Paul Manafort has said in court, guys. But this is also an important moment, no doubt, for the prosecutors in this case. Andrew Weissman, the special counsel, and what's on the line for them.
Absolutely, and that cannot be emphasized enough. This is really the prosecutor's last shot to make their case on the most high-profile investigation under Robert Mueller. It was a year and a half ago that Mueller filed his first charges against Paul Manafort, and here we sit here today for the final sentencing for Paul Manafort. And last week, let's be honest, was really a blow to Mueller's team of prosecutors, with the judge sentencing Manafort to 4 years, much less than the 25 years that was recommended. And so today you heard the prosecutors in the courtroom lay out the case that Paul Manafort undercut the U.S. Political process. They made the case that he was serving the interests of foreign governments and not the U.S. government. And they focused a lot on his behavior after he pleaded guilty, the lies, the witness tampering. Andrew Weissman, the lead prosecutor, says his actions after that are a reflection of someone who has not received a harsh lesson, someone who does not have remorse, someone who does not have a moral compass, someone who could look in the eyes of FBI agents and the grand jury and lie repeatedly. So that is the picture they are trying to paint, going straight to Paul Manafort's character. And then, as we've talked about, Kate, Paul Manafort tried to paint a very different picture of himself, and sitting in the wheelchair, showing remorse, saying that he is fully apologetic, accepts responsibility for his actions.
And just to update everyone, we're back in session. The judge, Amy Berman Jackson, has taken the bench. She took a brief recess after Paul Manafort finished speaking. She's now back on the bench, and we will see what she has to say in terms of Paul Manafort, his conduct, what she thinks he ultimately deserves. And just to highlight something that Pam said, I think this is not lost on the special counsel's team of what this day means for them. We have seen some emotion from them in court today. The lead prosecutor, Andrew Weissman, speaking softly at times. Our producers inside said he sounded a little nervous. Some of the prosecutors there after court wrapped up, right after the judge left the bench, the prosecutors were hugging with an FBI agent. So this is not lost on what this day means. This is really their last shot at laying out for us in the public, for the media. All the attention is on here today of what this investigation has been like for them and what it's been like for Paul Manafort, and why he has been so important, Kate, in this entire investigation. He's been the central figure here, even from the beginning. I remember when I just started covering this, there was so much, the FBI, intelligence officials were centered so much around Paul Manafort and his contacts and the people he was meeting with and the people he was talking about. And it's all coming to an end. And this is perhaps the last day for them here, for the special counsel's office, to make their case.
Yeah, it's a dramatic culmination, and really, as you pointed out, a justification for their work over the last nearly 2 years in this high-profile case. So a lot is at stake here for both sides. Kate?
Absolutely, guys. And I mean, remember, this has been going on for some 2 years, this investigation. Paul Manafort was the first person that the special counsel indicted. This has been a 1.5-year long legal battle that they have been going on. And this is, I mean, there are many chapters in this Russia investigation, as we have discussed. And this is the culmination of one of them, with Paul Manafort, the most high-profile case that they have had before the court with regard to the investigation. Let me bring back in Ellie. One of the things, since we've talked about the prosecutors, one of the things the prosecutors did not do in court this morning, they did not ask the judge for a specific amount of time in terms of punishment, prison time, for Paul Manafort. Is that unusual? Does that surprise you?
It is fairly unusual. Usually, prosecutors are asking for a sentence within the guidelines range. The wrinkle here, though, is that the guidelines range is actually significantly higher than the maximum allowable penalty. The most that this judge can legally sentence Paul Manafort to is 10 years. And so I think, in a way, that the prosecutors, it's pretty clear what they want. Even if they ask for something well below the guidelines range, we would still be talking about 10 years. So I think the prosecutors are sort of saying, Judge, it's in your hands. We trust you. Even a maximum sentence of 10 years here would be below the guidelines range. It's not common for that to happen, but it does happen sometimes.
I want to head back to the federal courthouse right now. We're getting an update from inside the court from the judge. Pam, Shimon, what are you hearing?
Yeah, so Kate, the judge now taking the bench, as we said moments ago, and she is speaking. I'm just going to go ahead and read to you what's going on and what she is saying. She's saying that Manafort is not victim number one. She's saying that these proceedings will not incriminate anyone in the ongoing investigation. Obviously, a lot having to do with Russia collusion, interference. She then says, and she goes right to it here, she says, any conspiracy, collusion was not presented in this case. Therefore, it was not resolved by this case. And I think that is an important point. We're all looking to see, when is this collusion question going to be resolved? And the judge going right there saying it's not resolved, and it's not going to be resolved by what takes place here today. Obviously, we're all waiting for the Mueller report and what happens there. But then again here, we have the issue of collusion and what this investigation has been centered about. And they're saying, as the judge did last week, that's not what today is about. Last week's sentencing was not about collusion.
Neither is today.
And neither is today.
An important point to emphasize, as we saw last week, President Trump distorted the words of the judge and said the judge said no collusion. And that is not what this judge said. The judge said last week or today. They're making the same point. That is not before the court today. These are charges separate from the question of collusion.
Yeah, their job is to not rule on everything with regard to the case, the investigation. The judge's job is to rule and offer a sentence on exactly the question before the court. And on this, it was conspiracy against the United States. And go ahead, Shimon.
Yeah, I just want to make this point also. Keep in mind, Judge Jackson has been in all sorts of secret proceedings surrounding this case, but also she's overseeing the Roger Stone case.
Exactly.
So she has a lot of insight into what the special counsel has. She's very careful because she doesn't want to reveal information that she knows that was filed with her under seal, that when she and also the secret proceedings that she conducted here after Paul Manafort breached the cooperation agreement, and prosecutors came in and had this lengthy hearing where everything was sealed, transcripts were eventually released. So she knows a lot about the special counsel's investigation. She understands it probably better than any judge in the district, probably better than any judge in the country. So she has a lot of knowledge, but she's not going to let any of us know of what that is. And I think that is an important point that she made. This is not about collusion today. And will it ever be? Will we ever get the answers that we all want? And the reason why this investigation was started.
Yeah, that we don't know.
She's continuing to talk right now, Kate.
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to quickly update. She's continuing to talk. And so, of course, we're looking at everything she says to glean. What is she going to do? What is she going to sentence Paul Manafort to? But she said very clearly, she said it laid out the foreign lobbying, not registering under FARA and so forth. She said it's the very conduct underlying some of the convictions in the Virginia case where he was sentenced last week. And as we know, though, he cannot be sentenced for the components in Virginia twice. she was clear to make that point earlier, saying, look, this is not a review of what happened last week, right? There were some people who criticized that Manafort was sentenced to 4 years and not more and so forth. She said, look, this is a separate case. These are separate charges, so that cannot be taken into consideration today. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I just want to bring out, she's talking, the judge is saying that Manafort's approach in his career, and many of the folks over at CNN who've dealt with him, may have more to say about this, but she's saying that his approach to his career, it's all about strategy, public relations, spin. And she says there is something wrong with it if you're not simply advancing a position as part of a PR campaign. What you're doing was lying to members of Congress and the American public. She is speaking directly, according to our producers inside court, she is speaking directly to Paul Manafort now, looking at him, talking to him. She's now saying if the people don't have the facts, democracy doesn't work.
Some stern words there from Manafort.
That's an important set of words.
Also, when you think about the political, Kate.
Go ahead, buddy.
She's taken the climate into consideration. What this has meant for the country politically, the fact that his conduct, through the years, his lies, his lobbying work, how it was undercut the American political system, how it undercut our country, and she's going there. She's taking it right to him right now.
She is, but we have to be careful here because it's easy to hear this and think, okay, she is really going to throw the book at him. But you'll remember last week with Judge Ellis, at one point he brought up the fact that pickpocketers in England centuries ago were hung, and so he made comments like that made you think, wow, he's really going to use this to set an example. And then he gave him 4 years, which was much less than the sentencing guidelines. So we really have to ultimately wait and see what she's going to do. But clearly, she's really laying into Paul Manafort for his actions. Yeah.
If the people don't have the facts, democracy doesn't work, Kate.
Yeah, that speaks not only to this case, that speaks to exactly what you guys are saying.
Yes.
That speaks to the broader environment, the broader climate, the fact that she is overseeing more than just the Paul Manafort case when it comes to the special counsel's investigation. Shan Wu, what you're hearing from Judge Jackson right now as they're laying it out, what strikes you?
I think she's very much focusing on the conduct before her and telling Manafort, that's what I'm doing. So she's setting up, if I punish you in a way that you think is harsh, here's why I'm doing it. And to your earlier point, I think it's really important she is overseeing these other investigations that are part of the special counsel probe. A lot of times when the judge does that, they internally are kind of keeping track of different defendants, different cases. That is one thing that's factored in here. We can't see it, but she has her own internal sense of proportionality here because she knows a lot.
Yeah, and also it also tells me that I'm sure. Well, what does it tell you? How closely is Roger Stone watching the sentencing here today?
I think he's watching very carefully and preparing what he thinks he can say about it.
Yeah, no kidding. Dana, to our discussion earlier about the prosecutors leaving the courtroom last week. Sorry, not the prosecutors. Manafort's attorneys leaving the courtroom last week and going directly out there and saying this is not about collusion. We hear again from the judge in the case. Yeah. Any conspiracy collusion was not presented in this case. Therefore, it was not resolved by this case.
Right, but as we've been talking about, that is, even though T.S. Ellis gave a sentence that was surprising to everybody and much more lenient than people thought, he said similar things before he gave that sentence last week in this federal courthouse in Virginia. So it's unclear if what we're going to see with the sentence will track with that. But I think what you're getting at, Kate, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it doesn't necessarily matter what the judge says because what the lawyers for Paul Manafort are likely to say and what they said last week is what the president wants to hear, which is this has nothing to do with me. This has nothing to do with collusion. This has nothing to do with the quote unquote witch hunt that's been going on. Poor Paul Manafort. Oh, maybe I'll issue a pardon.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's one message inside the courtroom and then a message outside the courtroom because is maybe the most obvious thing. There are two very different audiences that they're speaking to in these two different places. We are continuing to have the judge. She is continuing to speak right now, and we're trying to, as happened last week, Ellie, you dissect every word. You need to take everything that the judge says, though, in totality. She could be heading one direction in how she's addressing Paul Manafort and speaking directly to him, and then add in a big however and take a left turn.
True. It sounds to me, though, like she's winding up to deliver an uppercut here, given the things that she's saying, looking at the bigger picture, the broader impact of what Manafort has done here. And I think she makes a legitimate point. Yes, you will be treated as an individual, but you're not just any individual. You are a high-profile person who is at the highest ranks of a campaign, and your actions here have had a deleterious effect on the broader American public, on confidence in the system. And I think she's gonna hit him pretty hard with that. That's what it sounds like to me right now, Kate.
All right, let's find out some more. Let's head back to the courthouse. Shimon Prokupez, Pamela Brown, they're there getting updates from inside the courtroom. What are you guys hearing?
Right. So now, Kate, the judge is addressing the witness tampering charges, and she's basically saying that Paul Manafort immediately began reaching out to witnesses that were involved in this investigation. And then she says he did not plead guilty to contacting witnesses. He pled guilty to conspiring with Kalimnik. This is that Russian intelligence official that the FBI and the special counsel's office has said was working for the Russian government, that Paul Manafort was conspiring with him to reach out to witnesses to get them to shape potentially testimony or their cooperation in this investigation. The reason why I think that's important is obviously who Kalimnik is important in this entire investigation. He's the person that Paul Manafort shared polling data with, the Trump campaign polling data. The fact that we keep hearing his name today is significant. She also knows a lot more about Kalimnik, the judge does, than any of us do, because she has seen all of the sealed documents concerning him. So she's just going through character, Paul Manafort's character, his activity after he was charged. I think this is a significant part of this, and this is the thing I think that worries Paul Manafort's defense lawyers the most, is that this is where she can really go at him, is the witness tampering charges, where that is something that is taken so seriously by law enforcement, by judges all across this country. So that is where, for now at least, it would appear, that is where his biggest exposure is in terms of a sentencing time.
And as one might expect, in light of your point, we're told from inside the courtroom that Manafort is watching Judge Jackson, no smile, looking at her almost sheepishly. You know, and she made the point that I thought was interesting, that there was a DOJ investigation into Paul Manafort before the special counsel office, before Mueller was appointed. And so she's making that point, and that look, he is not, in her view, facing the sentencing today just because he was a high-profile person in the Trump campaign. He was already someone who was under investigation before.
And this helps, I think, the special counsel's team, because Manafort's attorneys are making this big deal out of the fact that the government, the highest levels, they said this in court today, that the highest levels of the U.S. government knew about his activity, and they knew about it because he was meeting with U.S. officials in the Ukraine, in Kiev, while he was doing this work for the Ukrainians in Kiev. So the defense argument that this is something that the U.S. government knew that Paul Manafort was engaged in for years and did nothing about, that is what she is addressing now. In the end, I don't know what relevancy that's going to have to anything, but at least that was an argument that they tried to make.
And I just want to say, I mean, this again gives you a window into her thinking. She is now really blasting Manafort, saying he made overblown statements about where he was housed in solitary confinement in jail when it was his benefit to do so. She says Manafort has begun to minimize his conduct and shield others. Jackson is clearly not happy with how Manafort has approached the final stretch of this case, and what she is saying today, Kate, she said court is one of those places where facts still matter. Really kind of a final punch there to Paul Manafort as she is speaking before she went through, she's going right now through the counts in the EDVA trial.
And the thing is with the solitary confinement, if you'll recall, he was at, I forget which jail he was. It was a local jail. They put him in a private wing, essentially, where he was still making contact with people and still working on his case. But they had taken issue with his conduct while he was in the special wing of this jail. He was getting, most people viewed as preferential treatment. So yeah, I think the solitary confinement issue, which he addressed when he spoke to the judge, told her how he's been in solitary confinement. We've heard this argument.
She's not buying it.
She's not buying it. We've heard this argument from the president. We've heard this argument from Rudy Giuliani.
She's not having any sympathy for him from what she's saying
That's
here.
right.
Guys, please stick with me. We're going to come right back to you as we are getting updates, and this could be coming any moment now. From what the judge is talking about in court and what she's addressing at this moment, it does make me wonder, Shan, if the sentence is harsh, what do you think it is that sank Manafort?
Oh, I think he sank himself. It is the witness tampering, which would really be the kind of moral basis for it being a harsh sentence. I think that's also the message that she's sending. She also, there's a history, I've been in that courtroom, and she has some friction with his defense counsel. She had taken Kevin Downing to task a few times. She does not like the sort of what she's calling hyperbole or the kind of over complaints about the situation. So I think those things may factor into any harsher sentence.
And Ellie, this emphasis on getting the facts in the court, they matter. If the people don't have the facts, democracy doesn't work. I mean, these are big statements, big pronouncements that the judge is making as she's winding up to give her sentence. What is she saying here? What's her message with this?
Yeah, so I think there she's addressing the other part of the case. There's the obstruction of justice part of the case, which I think is hugely important here, the witness tampering and the lying to Mueller. But I think when she's talking about the facts and the transparency, she's talking about the other conspiracy that Manafort pled guilty to, which is serving as an agent for a foreign government without registering with the United States government. And I think she wants to make the point that this isn't just some paperwork crime or some bureaucratic crime. If our government doesn't know who is working for foreign countries, that poses a real threat to our democracy and to our public confidence in our institutions.
Dana, just handed some reporting that Manu Raju just got from speaking to the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, and he obviously asked him about Paul Manafort. And what Senator Burr says is, you got to pay the price for the things you do. No kidding. But it also reminds me that no matter what happens in the next couple minutes, this is long from over in terms of investigations. Just look no further than Congress.
Absolutely, and Senator Burr obviously is still the Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, which led the Russia investigation. It still is, sort of. But the House is where we're looking, and it is what you're referring to, because they're just getting started, and this is about a man's future that is going on behind those doors in that federal courthouse. This is about the president's campaign chairman. This is about a whole lot of things specific to Paul Manafort and his case. But that, as you mentioned, I mean, this is so important, is just one aspect of the broader investigation dealing with Russia,
right,
and then a whole bunch of other issues that Michael Cohen brought up, which has nothing to do with Russia when he testified both publicly and privately.
And to one of the points, Shan, that Shimon and Pam are bringing up that Judge Jackson is saying in court right now, when it comes to, court is one of the places where facts still matter. Jackson's saying from the bench that she believes that Manafort and his legal team are still perpetuating a lie, are still lying even in his sentencing memo. I mean, I'm no attorney, but that doesn't sound like a good thing.
That's not, and your legal instincts are quite keen on that. That's not that's not happy news for the Manafort team to hear that, and that does go. That's a little bit of an echo of some of that friction that's been there. To the extent, Ellie knows sometimes style matters some in the courtroom. To the extent that she has been rubbed the wrong way by their style of advocacy, that does not bode well for Mr. Manafort.
No kidding. Let's go back to the courthouse. I want to bring in Pam and Shimon once again. It has been fascinating to listen, you guys, to the judge, through you guys, of course, thankfully, and how she is addressing Paul Manafort directly and speaking to all of the aspects of this. I do find it fascinating that she is really, I mean, taking us all kind of on a, I don't know if it's a lesson or on a walk in the journey that she has kind of gone in reaching whatever this eventual conclusion will be with the sentence she's going to hand down.
Yeah, she's using some very, very strong words and really laying it out, saying that that Manafort isn't even being straight with her now, that he lied. And she said at one point, were you spinning the facts to get a good deal then or a good deal now? She brought up the defense argument that Manafort has done so much for his country. And she said that there was no exhibit, no information or intelligence to back up the argument that, in fact, he has some of his actions have been for the country. But she did also say, to balance that out, that she did believe he was sincere when he spoke today in court, when he talked about the suffering of his family and his friends and his wife, of course, who he had pleaded to the judge to not let them be apart. And so she's sort of winding through all of this, talking about the good and the bad, but certainly scolding Paul Manafort throughout for the lying after his plea deal and the witness tampering.
Yeah, she's noting that he was not remorseful before today. It's what most of us have picked up on. Even last week, he didn't seem remorseful. He was sad about his condition, but he was never really sorry about what he did. And finally, today, he did do that. But I don't know that she's necessarily buying it. She's having a hard time with everything because it really wasn't until today she's questioning why he didn't write a letter to her. She's questioning why he did not write a letter on his own behalf. Right. Is what our producers are saying. That before today he was not remorseful, she notes.
This is a really strong statement. I don't know if you're there yet, Shimon, but she said, saying I'm sorry I got caught is not an inspiring plea for leniency, because she made the case earlier, Kate, that